my father testified against me in my custody battle. I made sure everyone knew why. The divorce started a year ago. Brad cheated with his secretary, a classic story. I had proof, photos, texts, everything. It should have been simple. I wanted shared custody of our son Noah, nothing more. Brad wanted full custody. Not because he loved Noah, but because full custody meant no child support. Brad made $200,000 a year. I made $40,000 as a nurse. Do the math. My dad, Frank, had been supportive at first. "That bastard doesn't deserve you," he said. "I'll help however I can." He watched Noah when I worked nights, drove him to therapy appointments, acted like the perfect grandfather. Then something changed 3 months ago. Dad started criticizing everything. "Noah's shoes look worn," he'd say loudly at pickup. "Are you struggling with money?" Or, "He seems anxious. Is everything okay at home?" Small comments that felt wrong. Brad's lawyer submitted the witness list 2 months ago. My father's name was on it, for Brad's side. I confronted Dad immediately. "It's for the best," he said. "Brad can provide better. Private schools, college funds, things you can't afford. I'm his mother. Noah needs me, not private schools." "You're being selfish. Think about Noah's future." The betrayal was devastating. My own father, testifying against me. My mom had died 5 years earlier. Dad was all I had left. The court date arrived. Brad's lawyer called Dad to testify. Dad sat in that chair and lied, said I was overwhelmed, said Noah seemed neglected, said he'd seen me crying, unable to cope, said I'd asked him for money repeatedly. All lies. The judge looked concerned. My lawyer tried damage control, but Dad seemed so sincere, so worried about his grandson, so reluctant to testify against his own daughter. Brad sat there smirking. That night, I was destroyed. Dad had effectively ruined my case. The judge ordered a custody evaluation based on his testimony. Then my friend Julia called. "Hey, weird question. I was at the country club yesterday and overheard your dad at the bar. He was drunk, talking about some investment opportunity with Brad." My blood went cold. "What exactly did he say?" "Something about 50,000? Once everything was finalized?" He seemed excited. Said Brad promised to help him with some business venture once he got full custody and didn't have to pay support. Everything clicked. Dad had been struggling financially since Mom died. Bad investments, gambling debts he thought I didn't know about. His house was being foreclosed on, but he'd hidden it from everyone. Brad knew. Brad always knew everyone's weakness. I hired a private investigator that night. Expensive, but necessary. Within a week, he had everything. Photos of Dad and Brad meeting at restaurants, bar receipts showing them drinking together for months, and then the jackpot. A recording from a sports bar where they were regulars. The bartender, Tony, was going through a custody battle himself. He'd been recording conversations for his own protection when he caught Brad and Dad. The recording was clear. Brad's voice, 50,000 cash once I get full custody. But you have to sell it. Tears, concern, the whole show. Dad's voice, what about my daughter? Brad, what about her? She'll get over it. You get your money, I keep mine instead of paying support. Everybody wins. Dad, 50,000, enough to save my house. Brad, plus you'll still see the kid. I'll need babysitting. They laughed. Actually laughed about destroying me. The next hearing was yesterday. Brad's lawyer stood up confident. Your Honor, we'd like to recall Frank Mitchell to discuss additional concerns. Dad walked in, ready to perform again. That's when my lawyer stood up. Your Honor, before Mr. Mitchell testifies, we have new evidence regarding his credibility. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. Every word, every laugh, every detail of their deal. Dad's face went from confused to horrified. Brad jumped up. That's inadmissible! Illegal recording. The judge looked at the bartender's affidavit. Actually, this establishment posts signs about security recordings. Your client had no expectation of privacy. Continue the recording. The rest was even worse. Brad talking about hiding assets. Dad is suggesting ways to make me look unstable. Brad saying Noah was just a paycheck to him. The judge stopped the recording. Mr. Mitchell, is that your voice? Dad stammered. It's not what it sounds like. It sounds like you perjured yourself for money. It sounds like a conspiracy to commit custody fraud. It sounds like you sold out your own daughter for $50,000. She turned to Brad. And you? Bribing witnesses, hiding assets, referring to your child as a paycheck. I've seen enough. The ruling was immediate. Judge Dean's voice cut through the silent courtroom like ice. She looked directly at Brad and my father, her face showing no emotion except cold control. She ordered an immediate 15-minute recess and told both lawyers they needed to stay in the building. Then she called for the bailiff and instructed him to make sure Frank Mitchell and Brad Harrison did not leave the courthouse. I sat frozen in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles turned white. Dad's face changed from confused to horrified as he realized everyone in that room now knew exactly what he'd done. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Brad stood near his lawyer's table, his expensive suit suddenly looking wrong on him, like a costume he'd borrowed. The bailiff moved to stand near the door, his presence making it clear nobody was going anywhere. Marlena touched my arm and guided me into the hallway during the recess. Other people from the courtroom filed out around us, some staring at me with sympathy, others whispering to each other about what they'd just heard. Marlena pulled me to a quiet corner and explained in a low voice that Judge Dean would almost certainly refer this to the district attorney's office for criminal charges. She said witness tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud were serious crimes. She also said the judge would likely make an immediate custody ruling based on everything the recording revealed about Brad's character. Julia appeared next to us, squeezing my hand tight. I looked down the hallway and saw Frank sitting alone on a wooden bench outside the courtroom. His lawyer had disappeared, probably wanting nothing to do with the mess. Frank stared at the floor with his shoulders hunched forward. On the other side of the hallway, Brad paced back and forth near the water fountain. He kept checking his phone and running his hand through his hair. His lawyer, Eric Yates, stood against the wall looking defeated. The 15 minutes felt like hours. A clerk came out and called everyone back into the courtroom. We filed back in and took our seats. Judge Dean returned to the bench and the bailiff called the court to order. The judge announced she was referring the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into witness tampering, perjury, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her voice stayed calm and professional, but every word hit like a hammer. She said that Brad's characterization of his own son as just a paycheck demonstrated clear unfitness for custody. She stated that Frank Mitchell's testimony had been purchased through bribery and therefore had no value in determining what was best for the child. Frank sat at the witness table staring down at his hands. The court reporter's fingers moved rapidly across her machine, typing every word into the permanent record. I watched the reporter's hands and realized this was really happening. Everything was documented. Everything was official. Judge Dean turned to face me directly. She awarded me full physical custody of Noah effective immediately. She said Brad would receive only supervised visitation at a court-approved facility pending a complete psychological evaluation. She ordered Brad to pay child support calculated on his full $200,000 annual income. She also ordered him to pay all of my legal fees within 30 days. Eric Yates stood up but didn't say anything. He looked at Brad and shook his head slightly. Brad's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth like he wanted to object, but Yates put a hand on his arm. They both knew the recording had destroyed any chance of arguing. The judge asked if I understood the ruling, and I managed to say yes. Marlena stood and thanked the court. Judge Dean nodded and said the written order would be filed by the end of business tomorrow. Then she dismissed us. I walked out of that courtroom barely able to process what had just happened. My legs felt shaky and the hallway seemed too bright. I'd won everything: full custody, child support, my legal fees covered. Marlena caught up to me and wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. She told me she was so proud of how I'd fought for Noah. Julia appeared on my other side and started crying. Not sad tears, but happy ones. She kept saying it was over, I'd won, Noah was safe. I realized I was crying too, but it felt different from all the crying I'd done over the past months. This wasn't pain or fear. This was relief flooding through my whole body. I'd been holding my breath for so long and finally I could breathe again. Frank tried to approach me in the courthouse lobby. I saw him coming from the corner of my eye and immediately turned away. He called my name once, then again, his voice breaking on the second try. I kept walking toward the exit with Julia on my left and Marlena on my right. They flanked me like bodyguards, their presence making it clear I wasn't stopping. Frank called out one more time, but I pushed through the heavy courthouse doors into the sunlight outside. Some betrayals cut too deep for words. Some things couldn't be fixed with an apology in a courthouse lobby. I needed space and time and distance from what he'd done. Julia drove me to her mom's house to pick up Noah. He'd been staying there during the hearing because I didn't want him anywhere near the courthouse. When we pulled into the driveway, he ran out the front door before I even got out of the car. He threw his arms around my waist and asked if everything was okay. I knelt down to his level and looked him in the eyes. I told him yes, everything was okay. We were going home together and everything was going to be fine. His face broke into a huge smile. He trusted me completely. That simple trust, that absolute faith that I would protect him and take care of him, made every horrible moment of the custody battle worthwhile. Julia's mom hugged me and said she was glad it worked out. We gathered Noah's backpack and his favorite stuffed dinosaur and headed home. That night, Noah and I ordered pizza from the place down the street. We sat on our small couch and watched his favorite superhero movies. He talked through most of them, pointing out his favorite parts and explaining the characters' powers to me even though I'd seen them a dozen times. Around 9 o'clock, he fell asleep with his head on my lap, his mouth slightly open and his arm wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur. I sat there for a long time just looking at him. I thought about how close I'd come to losing him. If Julia hadn't overheard Dad at the country club. If Tony the bartender hadn't been recording conversations for his own custody case. If any piece of the puzzle had been different, I might have lost Noah. The recording had saved us. But my willingness to fight, to hire the investigator, to not give up even when Dad's first testimony made everything look hopeless, that's what had gotten us to the point where the recording could matter. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing with calls from Dad's number. I let them all go to voicemail. When I finally checked the messages, there were 5 of them. In each one, he begged me to let him explain. He said he'd been desperate. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said he understood if I hated him, but please just listen. I deleted each message before it finished playing. I couldn't listen to his excuses yet. Maybe someday, but not now. The wound was too fresh and too deep. Julia came over that afternoon with coffee and sat with me in the kitchen. She told me I should take all the time I needed before deciding whether to ever speak to him again. She said there was no rush to forgive someone who'd tried to destroy my life for money. I appreciated that she didn't try to push me toward reconciliation just because he was family. The following week, Brad's supervised visitation started at a place called Family Bridges. It was a facility specifically set up for supervised visits with trained staff watching everything. Noah went for his first 2-hour visit on Saturday morning. When I picked him up, he climbed into the car and told me Dad had seemed really sad. He said Dad kept apologizing and asking if Noah was mad at him. That broke my heart in a different way than everything else had. Noah shouldn't have to deal with his father's guilt. I pulled into a parking lot and turned to face him in the back seat. I told him that none of this was his fault. I explained that sometimes adults make bad choices and have to face consequences, but that didn't change the fact that both his mom and his dad loved him very much. He nodded seriously and asked if we could get ice cream. I said yes, and we drove to his favorite shop, leaving all the complicated adult problems behind for a little while. 2 days later, Marlena called while I was making breakfast for Noah. She asked if I had a minute to talk, and I stepped into my bedroom and closed the door. The district attorney's office was moving forward with criminal charges against both Frank and Brad for conspiracy and witness tampering. Marlena explained this was completely separate from the custody case, but both men could face jail time if convicted. She said the DA took this kind of fraud very seriously because it undermined the entire court system. I sat down on my bed feeling strange about the whole thing. Part of me wanted them both punished for what they tried to do to me and Noah. But another part of me felt sick thinking about my own father going to jail. Marlena must have sensed my confusion because she told me I didn't have to make any decisions right now. The criminal case would proceed whether I cooperated or not since the recording was solid evidence. I thanked her and hung up, then stared at my phone for a long time before going back to finish making Noah's eggs. The following Monday, I returned to work at the hospital after taking a week off. My supervisor had been understanding about giving me time to deal with the custody hearing. Walking back into the emergency room felt both strange and comforting at the same time. My coworkers greeted me warmly, and several asked how everything went. I gave them the short version about winning full custody, and they all seemed genuinely happy for me. During my lunch break, my supervisor pulled me aside in the break room. She told me she went through a difficult custody battle about 15 years ago with her ex-husband. She said she understood what I'd been through, and if I ever needed to talk, she was there. I thanked her and felt grateful to work with people who actually cared. The normalcy of checking vitals, starting IVs, and dealing with everyday medical emergencies helped ground me after weeks of legal chaos. By the end of my shift, I felt more like myself than I had in months. 3 days later, I checked my bank account on my phone and saw a deposit for $3,200. The child support had started. I stared at the number on my screen, feeling a rush of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. $3,200 every month. I could afford Noah's therapy appointments without stress. I could buy him new shoes when he needed them instead of making the old ones last another month. I could start saving for emergencies instead of living paycheck to paycheck and praying nothing broke. Money didn't fix the emotional damage from everything that happened, but it removed the constant survival anxiety that had been crushing me for over a year. That weekend, I took Noah shopping and bought him 3 new pairs of shoes, some clothes that actually fit, and the science kit he'd been asking about for his birthday. He was so excited carrying the bags out of the store. I felt lighter than I had in forever. 3 weeks after the hearing, Marlena called again. Frank's lawyer had contacted her asking if I would consider writing a letter to the prosecutor requesting leniency for my father. Marlena asked what I wanted to do, and I told her I needed time to think about it. The anger was still too fresh to make that decision. Part of me wanted to let Frank face the full consequences of what he did. He sold me out for $50,000 and tried to take my son away. But another part of me remembered him being there after Mom died, helping with Noah, being the grandfather my son loved. Marlena said there was no rush and I should take all the time I needed. I hung up feeling conflicted and pushed the decision to the back of my mind. Noah had a therapy appointment the next Tuesday, and his therapist asked to speak with me alone for a few minutes at the end. I sat in her office while Noah played in the waiting room. She told me Noah was adjusting really well to the new custody arrangement and showed no signs of trauma from the court process. She said my honesty with him, keeping things age-appropriate but truthful, had helped him feel secure through all the changes. She explained that kids can handle difficult situations much better when the adults in their lives are honest and consistent. I felt grateful I had trusted my instincts about how much to tell Noah instead of trying to hide everything from him. The therapist said we could reduce his appointments to once a month instead of weekly. 2 days later, Marlena forwarded me Brad's psychological evaluation results. The court-appointed evaluator recommended continued supervised visitation and required co-parenting classes before any unsupervised time would be considered. The report noted Brad's tendency to view Noah through a financial lens rather than as a person with emotional needs. It said he showed limited insight into how his actions affected his son and needed significant work on developing empathy and appropriate parenting skills. Judge Dean had already issued an order requiring Brad to complete 12 weeks of parenting classes and continue supervised visits at Family Bridges. I felt relieved reading the evaluation because it validated everything I had been saying about Brad's priorities. Now that I had steady child support coming in, I started looking for a better apartment. Our current place was small and in a neighborhood I'd never loved, but it was what I could afford before. Noah and I spent a Saturday morning touring a 2-bedroom apartment in a nicer area closer to his school. It had a small fenced yard and the landlord allowed pets. Noah got so excited when he saw the second bedroom. He ran around measuring it with his arms spread wide, asking if we could paint it blue and if he could finally get a dog. The landlord was an older woman who seemed kind and said the previous tenants had been very quiet. I filled out the application right there, and she called me 2 days later to say we were approved. We could move in at the beginning of next month. I told Noah the good news when I picked him up from the school, and he actually jumped up and down in the parking lot. Julia came over the following weekend to help me start packing. We worked through my kitchen cabinets while Noah played in his room. She told me she was proud of how I handled everything and never gave up on Noah. I thanked her for being the friend who paid attention at the country club and took action when she overheard Frank talking. Without her making that phone call to tell me what she heard, I might have lost everything. Julia said that's what real friends do, and we hugged in my messy kitchen surrounded by half-packed boxes. She helped me wrap dishes in newspaper, and we talked about normal things like her job and the guy she'd been seeing. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't about custody battles in courtrooms. A week later, I got a call from Julia's mom saying a letter had arrived at my old address for me. She offered to drop it by and came over that evening. The envelope had Frank's handwriting on it. I thanked Julia's mom and waited until after Noah went to bed to open it. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Frank's careful script. He wrote about his gambling addiction and how it had spiraled after Mom died. He explained his financial desperation and the foreclosure on his house that he'd hidden from everyone. He described the shame he felt about what he did and said he understood if I never spoke to him again. He didn't ask for forgiveness or make excuses. He just laid out the facts of his failures and took full responsibility. I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer without responding. I wasn't ready to forgive him or even acknowledge his letter. The wound was still too raw. Moving day arrived on a sunny Saturday morning. Several nurses from the hospital showed up to help despite it being their day off. We loaded boxes into a borrowed truck while Noah ran back and forth between the old apartment and the new one. He claimed his bedroom immediately and asked 3 different people if we could paint it blue. Everyone laughed and promised to help paint once we got settled. By late afternoon, all our stuff was in the new place. Noah stood in the middle of his empty bedroom with his arms spread wide, talking about where his bed would go and where he'd put his toys. The fresh start felt symbolic of leaving the custody battle nightmare behind. I ordered pizza for everyone who helped, and we sat on my living room floor eating and talking. Noah fell asleep that night in his new room on an air mattress surrounded by unpacked boxes. I stood in his doorway watching him sleep and felt something shift inside me. We were going to be okay. Better than okay. We were going to build a good life here. 3 weeks after moving in, Marlena called with news about Brad. He'd finished all his court-ordered co-parenting classes and submitted paperwork requesting unsupervised daytime visits with Noah. She walked me through his compliance record over the phone. Perfect attendance at every class. Completed all assignments. The instructor's report praised his participation and willingness to learn. Marlena said the request was reasonable given his track record, and the court would likely approve it whether I agreed or not. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paperwork she'd emailed over. Noah deserved a relationship with his father. I knew that. My feelings about Brad didn't change what was best for my son. I called Marlena back and told her I wouldn't oppose the request. She filed the response that afternoon. The first unsupervised visit happened on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. Brad picked up Noah at 10 and they headed to the park near his apartment. I spent 3 hours cleaning my already clean apartment and checking my phone every 15 minutes. Noah came home at 1 with grass stains on his knees and chocolate ice cream on his shirt. He talked nonstop about playing basketball and how his dad taught him a new way to shoot free throws. They'd gotten ice cream from the truck by the playground. Brad had let him get a double scoop. I listened and smiled and told him I was glad he had fun. That night after Noah went to bed, I sat on my couch and admitted to myself that I was glad too. For Noah's sake, not for Brad's. I'd never trust Brad the same way again, but Noah didn't need to carry that weight. A week later, Marlena forwarded an email from Frank's lawyer. The district attorney had offered a plea deal. 3 years probation instead of jail time. 200 hours of community service. $15,000 in restitution to cover my legal fees. Frank's lawyer wanted to know if I'd support the agreement or if I planned to oppose it. Marlena said the decision was entirely mine. The DA would move forward either way, but my position could influence the judge during sentencing. I printed the email and read it probably 20 times over the next 3 days. Part of me wanted Frank to face the maximum consequences. He'd sold me out for money, lied under oath, almost cost me my son. But another part of me remembered he was still my father, still Noah's grandfather, still the man who'd raised me after Mom died. Julia came over on the third night and found me sitting at my kitchen table with the email. She made tea and sat across from me while I talked through my conflicting feelings. She didn't tell me what to do, just listened. By the time she left, I knew what I needed to write. I opened my laptop and started typing a letter to the prosecutor. I wrote that I didn't object to the plea deal, but I also wouldn't minimize what Frank had done. He'd betrayed his own daughter and grandson for money. That breach of trust had consequences that couldn't be erased by probation or community service. I explained how his testimony had nearly destroyed my custody case, and how I'd never forget watching him lie on the witness stand. But I also wrote that I believed in second chances for people willing to do the work to earn them. I finished the letter around midnight and sent it to Marlena for review. She called the next morning and said it struck exactly the right balance. Professional but honest, holding him accountable without being vindictive. She filed it with the prosecutor that afternoon. Frank's plea hearing happened 3 weeks later on a Thursday morning. I didn't attend, but Marlena went and called me afterward with details. Frank had stood before the judge and pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges. The judge accepted the plea deal. 3 years probation. 200 hours of community service at locations approved by his probation officer. $15,000 in restitution paid to me in monthly installments. The judge had looked directly at Frank during sentencing and told him he was lucky his daughter had shown mercy by not opposing the plea. Frank had nodded silently. Marlena said he looked older than she remembered from the custody hearing. More broken. His lawyer had helped him walk out of the courtroom afterward. I hung up the phone and sat in my car outside the hospital before my shift started. Justice had been served. Not the justice I'd imagined months ago, but justice nonetheless. 2 months after the custody ruling, Noah and I finally had a real routine. He had his own room painted the blue he'd asked for on moving day. I'd bought glow-in-the-dark stars and stuck them all over his ceiling in random patterns. We established bedtime rituals. Stories at 8:30, lights out at 9. Homework happened at the kitchen table right after school while I made dinner. Weekends meant pancakes on Sunday mornings and movie nights on Fridays. The apartment started feeling like home instead of just a place we lived. Noah invited friends over for the first time. Life felt normal again in ways I'd forgotten were possible. 6 weeks after the first unsupervised visit, Brad's lawyer filed another modification request. He wanted overnight visits now that daytime visits had gone well consistently. The custody evaluator submitted a report recommending approval with a gradual schedule. 1 weekend night per month to start, then increasing if everything went smoothly. Marlena called to discuss it, and I was ready to say no until Noah overheard my side of the conversation. He asked if he could have sleepovers at his dad's apartment. His face lit up when he talked about Brad's place having a guest room that could be his. I looked at my son's excited expression and called Marlena back to say I agreed to the evaluator's recommended schedule. Around that same time, my coworker Sarah mentioned her brother James was recently single and asked if I'd be interested in meeting him. I'd known Sarah for 3 years, trusted her judgment. I said yes mostly because Julia had been pestering me about getting back out there. James and I met for coffee on a Tuesday afternoon between shifts. He was a respiratory therapist at a different hospital. Easy to talk to, made me laugh. We started texting regularly and went on 3 more dates over the next month. Nothing serious yet, but it felt good remembering I was a person beyond being Noah's mom. Julia called one night after I got home from dinner with James and teased me about finally dating again. I laughed and told her to mind her business, but I felt lighter than I had in months. A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox on a Wednesday afternoon with Frank's return address. Inside was a photo of him wearing a volunteer shirt at a food bank. He stood behind a table sorting canned goods with other volunteers. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to the photo. He'd completed his first month of community service. He was attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week, seeing a therapist every Thursday, working on himself. The note didn't ask for forgiveness or request contact, just stated facts about what he was doing. I read it twice, then put both the photo and note in my desk drawer without responding. The wall of anger I'd built wasn't ready to come down yet, but I kept the photo. That meant something, even if I wasn't sure what. Noah's school conference was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late October. His teacher, Mrs. Maynard, had been sending home positive notes all semester, but I still felt nervous walking into the classroom. She smiled when I sat down and pulled out Noah's file. His grades were excellent across all subjects, math and reading both above grade level. But what she really wanted to talk about was his character. She called him kind and resilient, said he helped other students who struggled, shared supplies without being asked, included kids who got left out at recess. She told me I should be proud of the person he was becoming. I thanked her and made it to my car before the tears started. I sat in the parking lot crying for 10 minutes. Relief that Noah was okay despite everything. Pride in who he was. Gratitude that the custody battle hadn't broken him. When I finally drove home, I felt lighter. My son was going to be fine. Better than fine. He was going to be amazing. Noah's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks, and Brad texted asking if we could talk about plans. I stared at my phone for 5 minutes before responding that we should coordinate for Noah's sake. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places, sitting across from each other at a small table near the window. The conversation felt stiff at first, both of us avoiding eye contact and focusing on our drinks. Brad suggested we co-host the party at a local park so Noah could invite his school friends. I agreed it made sense, even though the idea of spending 3 hours pretending to be friendly made my stomach hurt. We divided up responsibilities without arguing, Brad handling decorations, and I would do the cake and food. He asked what Noah wanted for presents, and I told him about the science kit Noah had been talking about for months. Brad wrote it down in his phone and said he would get something different so Noah had variety. The whole meeting lasted 40 minutes, and we managed to stay polite the entire time, which felt like a small victory. The birthday party happened on a Saturday afternoon with clear blue skies and warm weather. Brad arrived early to help set up tables and hang streamers from the pavilion posts. We worked on opposite sides of the space, occasionally passing each other with awkward nods. 12 kids from Noah's class showed up along with Julia and a few other parent friends. Noah ran around playing tag with his friends, his face bright with excitement. Brad and I stood near the food table making small talk with other parents, acting like we were friendly co-parents instead of two people who barely trusted each other. When it came time for cake, Noah sat at the head of the table surrounded by his friends while we sang happy birthday. He closed his eyes tight, making a wish before blowing out all 8 candles in one breath. His smile was huge and genuine, the kind that made everything else fade away for a moment. Julia came up beside me while kids were eating cake and said I was handling everything with real grace. I felt a surge of pride knowing I had chosen Noah's happiness over my own anger and discomfort. A white envelope showed up in my mailbox 3 days later with Frank's return address in the corner. Inside was a check for $3,000 made out to me with neat handwriting. A folded note was tucked behind the check explaining he had sold his golf clubs, his old record collection, and some furniture to make this first restitution payment ahead of schedule. The note was short and factual, no requests for forgiveness or contact. I stood in my kitchen holding both pieces of paper, feeling a complicated mix of emotions I could not name. I deposited the check through my bank's mobile app that same afternoon and filed the note in my desk drawer without responding. Some part of me registered his effort even though I was not ready to acknowledge it directly to him. My supervisor called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, and I spent the walk down the hallway wondering what I had done wrong. She smiled when I sat down and told me the hospital was promoting me to a senior nurse position with a small raise and better daytime hours. She said I had shown remarkable strength and professionalism during a difficult personal time, and the whole unit had noticed. The recognition hit me harder than expected, making my eyes sting with tears I had to blink away. After months of feeling like my life was completely falling apart, someone was telling me I had handled things well. I thanked her and walked back to the nurse's station feeling lighter, like maybe I was doing better than I thought. Noah was coloring at the kitchen table that evening when he looked up and asked if Grandpa Frank could come to his school's Grandparents' Day event in 2 weeks. The question caught me completely off guard, and I felt my chest tighten. I asked him why he wanted Frank there, and he said he missed his grandpa and wanted to show him his science project. His face was open and hopeful in a way that made my heart hurt. I told him I needed to think about it and talk to his therapist first, which made his shoulders slump a little. He went back to coloring without arguing, but I could see the disappointment in how hard he pressed the crayons against the paper. I brought up Frank at Noah's next therapy appointment while Noah was in the waiting room. His therapist listened carefully as I explained the situation and Noah's request. She said supervised contact with Frank could actually be healthy for Noah if I felt comfortable with it and set clear boundaries. She stressed multiple times that this was completely my decision, and I should not feel pressured by anyone, including Noah. I spent the next several days thinking about it constantly, weighing Noah's needs against my own hurt and anger. Every time I started to say no, I pictured Noah's disappointed face at the kitchen table. I finally called Frank on a Sunday afternoon, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. I told him he could come to Grandparents' Day, but we needed to meet first and talk. He agreed immediately, his voice rough with emotion. We met at the same coffee shop where Brad and I had coordinated the birthday party, sitting at a different table near the back. Frank looked thinner and older than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. He apologized with tears running down his face, taking full responsibility for everything without making excuses or trying to justify what he had done. He said he understood if I never forgave him and just wanted the chance to be part of Noah's life again. I sat there listening, feeling my anger war with the memory of him being my dad before everything went wrong. I told him I was not ready to forgive him, but I would let him come to the school event for Noah's sake. He thanked me 3 times before we left. Grandparents' Day arrived on a Friday morning and I took time off work to be there. Frank showed up 10 minutes early, standing in the school parking lot looking nervous in khaki pants and a button-down shirt. He carried a wrapped present under his arm that turned out to be a book about space and planets. Noah spotted him through the classroom window and ran outside to meet him, throwing his arms around Frank's waist in a tight hug. Frank's face crumpled with emotion as he hugged Noah back, one hand on Noah's head. Noah grabbed Frank's hand and dragged him inside to show off his science project about volcanoes, talking a mile a minute about how he had built the model himself. I followed behind them, watching from near the door as Noah introduced Frank to his teacher and showed him around the classroom. My feelings were tangled and complicated, but seeing Noah, so happy, made it feel like the right choice. After the school event ended, Frank walked with us to the parking lot where Noah ran ahead to my car. Frank asked quietly if he could have occasional supervised visits with Noah, maybe once a month at my apartment where I would be present the whole time. I looked at his hopeful, nervous face and felt the weight of the decision. I told him yes to monthly visits at my place with me there, making it very clear this was for Noah's benefit and did not mean I had forgiven him. Frank nodded quickly, accepting the terms without argument. He thanked me and said he would not let me down this time. I drove away watching him wave at Noah in my rearview mirror. James and I had been dating for 3 months when I decided it was time for him to meet Noah. We planned a casual lunch at a family restaurant on a Saturday when Noah was with me. I was nervous all morning, changing my shirt twice and giving Noah a talk about being polite. James arrived right on time, bringing Noah a small action figure as an icebreaker gift. They hit it off immediately, talking about superhero movies and debating which character would win in different fights. Noah explained the entire plot of his favorite movie while James listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made Noah light up. After lunch, Noah told me in the car that he really liked James and asked if he was my boyfriend. I said yes, and Noah nodded like that made sense to him. I felt grateful to have adult companionship again, someone who saw me as more than just Noah's mom. 3 months into dating James, I got the paperwork from Brad's lawyer requesting a modification to 50-50 custody. He had completed all his court requirements, finished the co-parenting classes, and had successful overnight visits for 3 months straight. I called Marlena immediately, and she reviewed the documents in her office while I sat across from her desk. She looked up after reading everything and told me this would likely be granted based on Brad's compliance record and Noah's therapist reports showing positive adjustment. I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety, even though I knew she was right. Brad had done the work, shown up for Noah consistently, and followed every court order without complaint. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and I spent that time trying not to think about losing half my time with Noah. Judge Dean sat behind her bench reviewing Brad's compliance file and the therapist reports while both lawyers stood waiting. She asked Noah's therapist to summarize her observations, and the therapist explained that Noah had adjusted well to overnight visits and reported feeling safe and cared for at both homes. The judge nodded and reviewed Brad's completion certificates from his classes. She looked at me and said she understood this was difficult, but the evidence showed Brad had made significant changes in his parenting approach. She granted a gradual transition to equal custody over the next 2 months, starting with 3 nights per week and moving to alternating weeks after 60 days. I felt disappointed sitting there, but I understood the ruling was fair based on everything Brad had demonstrated. Noah would spend alternating weeks with each parent starting in 2 months, and I had to accept that. I focused all my energy on making Noah's time at my house as stable and loving as possible. We created special traditions just for us, like Friday movie nights where he picked whatever film he wanted, and we made popcorn together. Sunday mornings became pancake time, where Noah helped me mix the batter and flip them himself. James started joining us occasionally for these traditions, and the 3 of us developed a comfortable rhythm together. Noah would show James his latest drawings or talk about school projects, and James listened with genuine interest. I watched them interact and felt grateful to have someone in my life who cared about both of us. The house felt warmer with James there, and Noah seemed happy having another adult who paid attention to him. Frank's monthly visits with Noah became routine, and I noticed real changes in my father over those months. He showed up sober every single time, never smelling like alcohol or acting strange. Noah told me Grandpa Frank talked about going to meetings and seeing a therapist to work on his problems. I asked Frank about it during one pickup, and he confirmed he was attending therapy twice a week and volunteering at the food bank on weekends. Our conversation stayed surface level and polite, but I could see he was genuinely trying to change his life. I was not ready for full reconciliation or deep talks about what happened, but I acknowledged his effort. Frank never pushed for more than I offered, and seemed grateful just to see Noah once a month. The transition to 50-50 custody began, and Noah adjusted better than I had expected. Brad had set up a real bedroom for him with new furniture and posters of Noah's favorite superheroes on the walls. Noah came home after his first week there and told me his dad cooked spaghetti for dinner and helped him with his math homework every night. He said they went to the park on Saturday and played basketball together. I felt grateful that Brad was being a real parent instead of just going through the motions. I missed Noah terribly during his weeks away, and the house felt too quiet without him. But seeing him happy and well cared for at both homes made the separation easier to handle. 6 months after the custody ruling, I was folding laundry in my bedroom when I realized I felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. My career was thriving after the promotion to senior nurse, and I loved my new responsibilities at the hospital. Noah was well-adjusted and doing great in the school despite splitting time between 2 homes. James and I were getting serious and talking about future plans together. I looked around at my life and barely recognized the broken woman who had sat in that courtroom listening to her father's lies. The custody battle nightmare felt like it had happened to a completely different person. I had built something good from the wreckage, and that felt like its own kind of victory. Brad and I successfully co-parented through school conferences, doctor appointments, and activity schedules without major conflicts. We sat together at Noah's parent-teacher conference and both asked questions about his progress. We coordinated his dental appointments and made sure he had everything he needed at both houses. Our communication became efficient and focused entirely on Noah's needs, rather than our past issues. I never thought we would get here after everything that happened. We were not friends, and probably never would be, but we had both grown into better versions of ourselves. Brad was actually being a father instead of viewing Noah as a financial burden, and I had learned to let go of some control. Frank's probation officer sent a letter saying he had completed all his requirements 3 months early due to excellent compliance. Frank called me that evening to share the news, and his voice sounded lighter than it had in years. He asked if we could have coffee together, just the 2 of us without Noah there. I thought about it for a minute while he waited on the phone. Something in his tone made me feel ready for that conversation. I agreed to meet him the following Saturday at the coffee shop near my house. He thanked me twice before we hung up, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Frank and I met at the same coffee shop where we had talked before Grandparents' Day. He was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived and stood up when he saw me. He had lost weight and looked healthier than I remembered seeing him in years. His face had more color and his eyes were clearer. We ordered coffee and sat down across from each other. Frank spoke with genuine humility about his recovery journey, attending meetings regularly and working through his gambling addiction with his therapist. He talked about volunteering at the food bank and how helping others had changed his perspective on his own problems. I listened to him describe the work he had done and felt proud of his changes even though the hurt was still there. I told him I was proud of how far he had come, but the trust he broke would take years to rebuild. He nodded and said he understood completely. He just wanted the chance to try to prove himself over time. James and I celebrated our 6-month anniversary with a nice dinner at an Italian restaurant while Noah was at Brad's for the week. We sat at a table by the window and talked about how much had changed since we first met. James reached across the table and took my hand. He told me he was falling in love with me and wanted to meet my friends and family properly. He said he could see a future with me and Noah and wanted to be part of our lives long term. I felt my heart speed up as I looked at him and realized I was falling for him too. I told him I felt the same way, and that I was ready to build something new with him. We stayed at that restaurant for 3 hours just talking about our hopes and plans. I drove home that night feeling like my life had finally come together after being broken apart. Noah's school held their award ceremony on a Thursday afternoon in the auditorium packed with families. I sat in the middle section next to Brad, both of us watching the stage where rows of kids waited for their names to be called. Frank sat 3 rows behind us on the left side, and I could see him from the corner of my eye. The principal started reading names for the Citizenship Award, and when she called Noah's name, Brad and I both stood up clapping. Noah walked across the stage looking embarrassed but happy, and I caught Frank standing up too, his hands coming together in loud applause. After the ceremony ended, Noah ran to us in the lobby holding his certificate, and Brad ruffled his hair while I hugged him tight. Frank approached slowly, staying back a few feet, and Noah broke away to show him the award. My father bent down to look at it closely and told Noah he was proud, his voice quiet but genuine. Summer came fast after school ended, and Noah packed his duffel bag for sleepaway camp with more excitement than I'd seen in months. The camp cost money we could finally afford thanks to Brad's child support payments arriving on time every month. I drove Noah to the camp bus pickup location and watched him climb on with 20 other kids, all of them talking loud and bouncing in their seats. He waved from the window as the bus pulled away, and I stood there feeling strange about having 2 weeks without him. The first postcard arrived 3 days later addressed to me, covered in Noah's messy handwriting about swimming in the lake and making a friend named John. Another card came for Brad's address, and a third one went to Grandpa Frank's house. I used the free time to plan a weekend trip with James to a beach town 2 hours away. We left on Friday morning and spent 2 days walking on the sand, eating seafood and talking about everything except custody battles and family drama. James held my hand while we watched the sunset on Saturday night, and I felt myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. Frank showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon carrying an envelope. He asked if he could come in, and I let him stand in the entryway while he pulled out a check. The amount was $15,000, the final payment of his restitution to me. He explained that he'd been working extra hours and sold his old car to make the payment 3 months ahead of schedule. His probation officer had told him he didn't need to rush, but Frank said he wanted to finish what he owed. He stood there holding the check out to me, and I took it from his hand without saying anything for a moment. Then he asked if he could take Noah to a baseball game next month, just the two of them. I thought about it while Frank waited, his face showing he expected me to say no. But something in me had shifted over the past months, watching him do the work and show up consistently. I told him yes, he could take Noah to a game. Frank's shoulders dropped with relief, and he thanked me twice before leaving. I watched him walk to his car from my window, noticing he moved differently now, less weighed down. Brad called me one evening during his custody week to talk about someone he'd been seeing. Her name was Rachel, and they'd been dating for 2 months, serious enough that he wanted to introduce her to Noah gradually. He asked if I was okay with it, which surprised me because the old Brad wouldn't have asked. I said yes, knowing Noah needed to see his father building a normal life. When Noah came back to my house the following week, he mentioned Rachel without me having to ask. He said she was nice and had a dog named Buster that he got to play with. She worked at a bank and made good pancakes. I felt a weird twist in my stomach hearing about Brad's girlfriend, something that might have been jealousy, but mostly felt like relief. Brad was moving on and building something new, which meant he was less likely to drag us back into court drama. Noah seemed happy about Rachel, and that mattered more than my complicated feelings. Julia's wedding happened on a Saturday in June at a garden venue covered in white flowers. I wore a blue dress and James wore a suit, and we sat together during the ceremony, watching Julia marry her partner of 3 years. The reception started with dinner and dancing, and halfway through the night, Julia grabbed the microphone for toasts. She thanked her parents and her new spouse, and then she looked directly at me. She said I was the strongest person she knew. Someone who fought for what mattered and never gave up even when her own family turned against her. The room got quiet and people turned to look at me, and I felt my face get hot. Julia raised her glass and said she was honored to call me her best friend. James squeezed my hand under the table while everyone clapped. Later that night, sitting in James's car in the parking lot, I thought about the woman I'd been in that courthouse hallway a year ago. That version of me was destroyed, certain she'd lost everything. I'd survived something that should have broken me completely, and somehow I'd come out stronger on the other side. The journey had been brutal and unfair, but I was still standing. Noah and I sat on the couch one night eating ice cream and watching a movie when he said something that stopped me mid-bite. He told me he was glad we had 2 houses now because he got to see both his parents and everyone seemed happier. I put my spoon down and looked at him. This kid who'd been through his parents' divorce and a custody battle and all the adult drama we tried to shield him from. He said at first he was scared about going back and forth, but now he liked having 2 rooms and 2 sets of toys. Plus his dad wasn't as stressed anymore, and I smiled more. His simple way of seeing things made me realize he was right. The custody arrangement that had terrified me, that I'd fought against with everything I had actually created better relationships all around. Brad and I were better co-parents than we'd ever been as a married couple. Noah got quality time with each of us instead of living in a house full of tension and resentment. Even Frank's betrayal had forced changes that led to healing. I hugged Noah and told him I was glad too, meaning it. The 1-year mark after the custody battle passed without me really noticing until I checked my calendar. 12 months since that recording played in the courtroom and changed everything. I sat at my kitchen table looking at where my life had landed and barely recognized it compared to a year ago. Work had promoted me to a senior position with better pay and a schedule that let me attend Noah's school events. My relationship with James had grown into something solid and real, built on him seeing me at my absolute worst and choosing to stay. Noah was thriving with good grades, close friends, and a therapist who said he was one of the healthiest kids from a divorced family she'd worked with. Even my relationship with Frank had slowly healed into something cautious but genuine. He showed up consistently for Noah, paid his restitution early, attended his meetings, and volunteered at the food bank every week. We weren't back to where we'd been before his betrayal, and maybe we never would be, but we'd built something new that felt more honest. Thanksgiving planning started in October when Brad and I sat down to work out the holiday custody schedule. We decided to split the day, with Noah spending morning and lunch at my house and evening at Brad's place. Brad joked about how far we'd come from the courtroom disaster, and I actually laughed. We were sitting in a coffee shop like 2 normal divorced parents working out logistics, no lawyers or judges or recordings. I never thought I'd be grateful for anything Brad did, but his conspiracy getting exposed turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. It forced both of us to become better versions of ourselves. Brad had to face what he'd done and work to earn back credibility as a father. I had to let go of control and trust the system. Christmas planning went even smoother, with us alternating years for Christmas morning and sharing Christmas Eve. We texted back and forth about gifts to avoid duplicates, and Brad asked my opinion on what Noah wanted. It felt strange and normal at the same time. New Year's Eve arrived, and James took me to a nice restaurant downtown with a view of the city. We ate dinner and drank wine, and at 11:30 he suggested we go outside to watch fireworks. We stood on the restaurant's rooftop deck bundled in coats, and when the countdown started, James turned to face me. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it before I could process what was happening. The ring caught the light from the building behind us, and James asked me to marry him. He said he was ready to build a future with someone who'd let him see her at her lowest, and loved him anyway. I said yes without hesitating, knowing I was ready for this. Noah was at Brad's for the holiday, and I called him right after midnight to tell him the news. He screamed with excitement and asked if he could be in the wedding. I told him of course he could, and he started planning what suit he wanted to wear. Everything I'd fought for in that custody battle, my son and my stability and my happiness, was finally secure in ways I'd never imagined possible. Frank came to our engagement party in February, held at Julia's house with close friends and family. He stayed near the edges of the room at first, talking to people he knew but keeping distance from me. Halfway through the party, he approached and asked if we could talk privately. We stepped into Julia's kitchen away from the noise, and Frank told me he was proud of the life I'd built despite his betrayal. He said watching me survive and thrive had taught him more about strength than anything else in his life. I looked at my father, this man who'd sold me out for $50,000 and nearly cost me my son, and I realized the anger that had consumed me for so long had changed into something different. I understood now that people could change if they did the actual work, not just talked about it. Frank had spent a year proving himself through actions instead of words. I stepped forward and hugged him for the first time in over a year, feeling his arms wrap around me carefully like he was afraid I'd pull away. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it. The engagement party continued around us, but something had shifted in me after that hug. I stepped back from Frank and returned to James's side, feeling lighter than I had in months. The next week, Noah had his regular therapy appointment, and his therapist asked to speak with me afterward. She sat down across from me in her office and said Noah was doing better than most kids from divorced families she'd worked with. He felt secure with both parents, understood that the divorce wasn't his fault, and had healthy ways of expressing his feelings. She recommended ending regular sessions and switching to check-ins only if issues came up. I drove home feeling proud of how Brad and I had protected Noah through everything. We'd both messed up plenty, but we'd kept him safe from the worst of it. The custody exchange the following Saturday happened at a park halfway between our houses. Brad arrived on time, and Noah ran to show him a drawing he'd made. While Noah played on the swings, Brad walked over to where I stood by my car. He looked uncomfortable but determined, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He said he wanted to thank me for exposing what he'd done with Frank, because it forced him to become a better father. He admitted that he'd viewed Noah as a financial burden before, something to win or lose in the divorce. Now he actually looked forward to his weeks with Noah and felt guilty about the person he'd been. I told him Noah was lucky to have him now, and I meant it. Brad had done real work to change, attending those parenting classes and actually applying what he learned. Frank started picking Noah up once a month for grandfather-grandson outings, just the two of them. They went to baseball games, museums, and sometimes just walked around the park feeding ducks. Noah came home from one of these visits talking about how Grandpa Frank had told him everyone makes mistakes, and the important thing is learning from them. Frank was modeling accountability for my son in ways I never expected. I was grateful Noah had that example of someone who'd messed up badly, but was doing the work to be better. 3 months before the wedding, James moved into our house with his furniture and belongings filling the spare rooms. Noah adjusted to having James around full-time, and the three of us developed routines together. James cooked breakfast on weekends while I got Noah ready for soccer practice. He helped with homework at the kitchen table and respected when Noah needed to call Brad about something. James never tried to replace Noah's father, just carved out his own space in our lives. I watched them playing video games together one evening and realized families could be rebuilt in ways I never imagined possible. The wedding planning happened quickly once James moved in. We decided on a backyard ceremony at our house with close friends and family. Julia helped me pick out a simple dress, and Noah got excited about wearing a suit. The morning of the wedding arrived sunny and warm. Chairs filled our backyard and flowers decorated the fence. Noah walked me down the short aisle we'd created, holding my hand tightly. James stood at the front with the officiant, smiling so wide I thought his face might split. Brad sat in the third row next to his girlfriend, and Frank sat near the back, both of them there to celebrate this new chapter. Julia cried during the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. The officiant pronounced us married, and everyone clapped. I looked around at all these people who'd fought alongside me to get here. The custody battle felt like it had happened to a different person. Our honeymoon took us to a beach resort where James and I spent a week swimming and eating good food and sleeping late. One afternoon, lying on the sand, I thought about Tony the bartender and that recording. He'd been recording conversations for his own custody battle and accidentally caught Brad and Frank's conspiracy. Sometimes justice needed both luck and hard work. I'd had the determination to keep fighting, and the universe had provided that recording at exactly the right moment. Without both elements, I might have lost Noah. 18 months had passed since that courtroom hearing when the recording played through the speakers. My life now looked nothing like what I'd imagined during those dark days. I had my nursing career with the senior position and better pay. I had James, who loved me and treated Noah like his own. I had Noah, happy and healthy, splitting time between two parents who both put his needs first. I even had a healed relationship with Frank, cautious but real. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me had somehow led to the life I was supposed to have. Frank selling me out for $50,000 had exposed Brad's true character and forced both men to face what they'd done. If Frank had never testified, if Brad had never been caught, I might have lost custody to a man who viewed his son as a paycheck. Instead, the conspiracy falling apart had created something better for everyone. Noah had two engaged parents now instead of one manipulative father. Brad had become someone his son could respect. Frank had confronted his gambling addiction and gotten help. I'd learned I was stronger than I ever knew. Sometimes the worst betrayals crack you open in ways that let the light in.